President Donald Trump says he will raise global tariffs from 10% to 15% a day after the Supreme Court struck down his reciprocal tariff policy. In a post on Truth Social, Trump says the increase is immediate and warned that further tariffs could follow. The move comes after the court ruled that Trump exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows only temporary levies unless extended by Congress. Trump slammed the ruling as ridiculous, poorly written, and extraordinarily anti-American. Right, for more on this chat, I'm joined by Thina Nodada, a director at Waymaker Global Trade Solutions. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. So what is your assessment of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision that President Trump overstepped his powers with tariffs imposed under the IEEPA law?
Thank you, Katlego, for having me. Look, I think President Trump was always overstepping his role and his power by increasing those tariffs to the levels that he did. Globally, targeting different countries with different amounts of tariffs, reaching up to 50%. So the ruling by the Supreme Court shows that a president doesn't have the right to make such changes unless there's a national emergency that has been declared and approved by the Department of Commerce. This never took place under Trump's administration. This never took place even when he started raising the tariffs at the beginning. So it has always been a questionable thing and has had quite an impact on the American economy.
And what would this then mean for those countries, like you say, whose tariffs have been increased to up to 50% now that the court has ruled in the way that it has?
So it means for the countries that the country's products then become more affordable to the Americans. So what really becomes important to understand is that when you increase tariffs, the people that are actually impacted the most are the suppliers, because of the buying power from the buyers is decreased, because now what was $100 now becomes $150. So it's had a major impact on, we know here in South Africa, our automotive sector, our citrus sector as well, in the agriculture space. So it's definitely had that impact. But with that said, if you look at it now with the ruling from the Supreme Court, the rule is now that if the ruling stands, then the next thing would be for the companies that were importing from the US would then need to be refunded for the $130 billion that the US has collected since they imposed these tariffs. So it has an impact on all sides, but I still believe that the biggest impact and those that are hit the most are actually the Americans, because they're the ones whose pockets can only afford so much. They are limited now because of the increase in tariffs. And then on our side as well, and the rest of the world, the US is a big market. Yes, we know for us, if we take SADC, with SADC being our biggest trading partner, which many of us don't seem to realize, but our biggest trading partner is SADC, our Southern African Development Community, and China and the US. So when you take the US out, it definitely has an impact on the suppliers that were reliant on the US market. But the people who feel it the most are the US citizens that have to pay more for everything that they bring in.
So with this ruling then, Thina, how might it influence international trade negotiations and tariff strategies then moving forward?
Look, I think that it's an immature approach to go globally and simply say globally, I'm hitting you guys with 30% tariffs across all products. Because tariffs are decided by their calculated decisions. It's not something that you can just wake up and say, I'm going to hit China with 20% across all sectors. And this is because of demand and supply. Certain countries have certain products, certain countries don't have certain products. So if you don't have a product, you don't want to put a high tariff on that product. You want it to come in 0% because it doesn't compete with your domestic market. However, now, if you just go blatantly and put in a blanket 30% or across all sectors, this was always going to affect the US economy even more and further alienate them from international trade and international commerce, Yes, they're betting on the fact that they are a big market for many countries, 100%. We all recognize that, and that's why it's had the impact that it's had. However, it does not it does not bode well for the US unless for perhaps maybe Trump is looking at that the revenue from the duties. I just mentioned the 130 billion US dollars.
Right.
Then that might be the motivating factor. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to the cost of living, the cost of goods, it has increased in the United States, and I don't think it fares very well for them.
So with President Trump then signing a proclamation to impose a 15% tariff under a different law, what do you predict will be the next steps in U.S. trade policy?
Yeah, so he's put in that 15% after the Supreme Court came against him, his decision on the previous tariffs that were there, but he's only got about 5 to 6 months where he can have that 15%, which is the maximum that can be put and tariff that can be implicated. So I don't see the Supreme Court backing down from Donald Trump. I think that the decisions that led to them um, um, stating that these tariffs were not legal, I think they still stand. It's not the first time that the courts in the US have challenged these decisions. So I don't know what it is that Donald Trump might do or what it is that may change what they feel. But beyond the impact on the citizens, it's simply not legal for a president to make a decision like that unless he has the support of certain bodies within the country.
And when we go back to speaking about the impact on the business community itself, I mean, how can businesses prepare for these fluctuating tariffs and these changing trade policies in this current geopolitical space?
Yes, no, Katlego, that's a good one. And unfortunately, those are the people, the consumers and the business owners are the ones that are faced with a lot of unpredictability. When you look at the US, we've had negotiations with them around AGOA. We've had tariffs that have been implicated on South Africa, Lesotho, etc., and other countries. So it's really created a lot of uncertainty to know as to, what is my pricing? What is my total landed cost when my product arrives, whether it's via sea or air? What is that total landed cost? And this affects business negotiations because the price factor is volatile. And we don't know what might happen in 2 weeks. We found out yesterday it went from 10% to 15%. It's been rock and roll, since the second term of the Trump administration.
It certainly has been rock and roll. Lastly, Thina, I mean, for companies engaged in international trade, what strategies would you recommend in order for them just to mitigate these risks that are associated with sudden tariff changes or legal rulings?
Look, unfortunately, I would say take a bit of a seat back, be wary of the risk involved, the volatile situation. If you can imagine now, Katlego, if someone has cargo at sea that's going out to the US, and yesterday Trump just announced a 15% tariff. So it unfortunately that cargo is already at sea, and when it gets to the U.S. government, when it arrives there, they're going to implement those 15% unless something changes now. So it's a very volatile situation, which we have to continue monitoring because number one, it's very difficult to ignore the U.S. market, especially for certain sectors. It's not easy to just open up a new market. I know that in South Africa, we're talking about going into Africa, expanding our trade with the Middle East, China for that matter as well. But it doesn't happen overnight, especially on the food items, where there's sanitary and phytosanitary standards that have to be met first. So I'd say practice with a bit of caution if you are in business. But yeah, be open to the volatility and keep an eye on what's happening with Trump and tariffs. And this is if you are exporting to the US.
Well, certainly a volatile time for exporters. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Thina Nodada, the